population in the present context of pandemic through a gender lens. Our another objective was to expose our students and researchers to issues those are not covered in the standard course of syllabus. As we all know, all over the world, there is a rising concern about displaced population uprooted from their own countries, living in other countries. Questions of the human rights, citizenship, welfare, and entitlements are matters of global concern. The host countries also face various problems, socioeconomic, political, in this respect. All these states in the Northeast region has international border and also has different experiences in this regard. To throw light on all these and other women refugees particularly, we have today with us Dr. Anindita Ghoshan, who is an academic par excellence working with Diamond Harbour Women's University. Her research interest is in refugee studies. She is published author and commentator on contemporary issues. We are all eagerly waiting to listen to her now. So without elaborating much, I would now request Professor Shyamul Das, who has kindly agreed to chair this session, to take over. Over to Professor Das. Good morning to you all.
A warm welcome and a good morning to you all. Marginalization, women, and refugee. Few words are there. So this has created a lot of hue and cry since this migration and then forced migration has started from Bangladesh to India, particularly in Tripura and West Bengal. And that is the desire for the root is still there, resulting in a great branch of literature which is called diasporic literature, a desire to come back. And even those who have not left India and are not in their own place, the desire for the root is still there. That has created literature, desire, many movements, political or apolitical, or all these things. So it will be a nice talk. I would like to welcome again Dr. Ghoshal because of your credentials, as I can see over here. I think we are going to get a special focus and light from your discussion. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, sir. So should I start?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ma'am, should I start?
Yes. Start.
Okay, yeah. I have one PowerPoint presentation, so let me try to...
You can share your screen.
Yeah, share my screen. Right, yeah. You can like hear me and you can see this, right?
It's on the screen.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
This PPT is visible, right?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
it's visible.
okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm actually extremely grateful to all of you, especially to the director, honorable director of the School of Women's Studies, and also the former director, as I know her for long. And thank you so much, sir, Dean sir, for this generous introduction. And I'm extremely grateful to Oshim. He's kind of a brother, and my friend Vidisha. Most of you probably know that I grew up in Koilashahar. I grew up in Tripura. So I probably I can connect more with my kind of land when I talk about Tripura. And for this presentation, since it's a presentation or since it's a talk for the School of Women's Studies, so I have designed my talk in such a way so that I can talk a little bit more on refugee women and not on migration. But since the basic issue or basic thrust is the migration and the refugees, so let me just talk a little bit, maybe for 10 minutes, about the migration pattern and refugee issues, like the coming up of the refugees, their pattern of migration in Northeast India. And to discuss that, I'll first start with Tripura, obviously. And later I'll discuss a little bit about Assam, since in my area of study, or since in my case studies, I actually worked on Tripura and Assam more, also Shillong, but now it's Meghalaya. So I will talk little bit on the refugees in general, and then on refugee women. And since this course is for the research scholars and for the students, so I have designed these lecture in such a way so that they can get benefited out of this lecture. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm actually touched and very grateful. Trust me. So let me start with that we know the real meaning of the term Tripura is the land beside water. So there is a huge debate among the historians and social scientists, political scientists, to connect these two ideas, that how is it possible that this land was, Tripura was the land, it was the land beside water. So I'm not going into that debate, but let me start with the identity of Tripura as a state. So if we look at the literature or the literary sources, some kind of archival sources, so these are like the popular kind of term to describe Tripura. During the Mughal period, people started like categorizing Tripura, this land, as Mughlan, and the most popular term was Shadhin Tripura. For the tribals, I'm not going into the debate again that who are these tribals, as there are so many like analysis and so many theories behind it, but the popular term was Kohe Tripura, Parbot Tripura, and Parboto Tripura. Parboto Tripura is obviously Bangla. And from 1761, in all official documents, they started describing this land as Hill Tripura, and also in all these maps. And from 1920, it was more direct, and people started calling it a Tripura state, especially in the official documents, which I consulted everywhere, even in India Office Library, London. So the very popular name was the Tripura state, and they always try to write down the Maharajas, not the kings. So that is also very important, that this land always had a link with the kingship. It was a princely state, and it was widely recognized by that, which is important. Let me share you one thing, that in India Office Library, I saw a marriage card of the Tripura Rajbari, and there I saw that they invited for many like amusements, and it was a kind of festival kind of thing. And I realized that they invited lots of Northokis from all over India, and they nicely like wrote down that word North, N-A-U-T-C-H. So from that we can understand the actual status of the state of Tripura for that. So let me start. Let me talk a little bit about the migration thing. As we all know, I'm sure that all of you know all these things, so I'll not elaborate. But the point is, which is important in case of the refugees of Tripura, since I'm talking on refugee women. So in case of the refugees of Tripura, the most important thing is all these Bengali migrants, later immigrants and refugees, after partition, the government started treating them or categorizing them as displaced persons. So all these categories, most of the Bengali people, they were actually the inhabitants of Chakla Roshanabad estate, and there is a connection between the plain Tripura and hill Tripura. So, which is important here, which we need to understand, that for most of the refugees, so-called refugees, they actually never treated them as refugees, and the Maharajas and the Tripura administration, which was a very characteristic feature of Tripura. This state language issue is very important. As we know that there is a huge debate between that who is the original inhabitants of Tripura. Again, I'm not going into that debate, but the popular language of the tribals, and these tribals are again not like a homogeneous category. So there are too many differences. But the language, the official language of these tribals were Kokborok, and they used to converse in different dialects of Kokborok. That is also a very important kind of thing in case of Tripura. Huh? But Rajmala, which is a main source, key source, chief source to understand the history of Tripura. So it officially had stated that the Maharajas were in favor of the Bengalis, and the Bengali Hindu upper caste Bengalis, they started getting invitation from 1280, so long back. Huh? And the Maharajas, they adopted Bengali culture and declared Bengali as Raj Bhasha in 1850. But it is important to say that it was actually not just for the love of the Bengali culture and language. They actually tried to utilize its potential as a lingua franca, and also there is a economic reason behind that. But the thing is that the nature of mobility to Tripura actually was never like a forced migration. So the Jiratia Projas, they were seasoned in seasonal migration. They always came to Tripura for agricultural purposes. So as we know that the Zoom or the shifting cultivation was like a culture of the tribals. It is not only a method of cultivation. So it was into their culture. So all these things actually made the case study of Tripura very different. Huh? And I should mention here about the Jangalabadi system. And Maharajas, they were actually dependent on the Bengalis, staffs, and especially the Muslim cultivators, Muslim Bengali cultivators, to increase the revenue connection. And it always happened that the plain Tripura was kind of supplied more revenues to hill Tripura, as the plain Tripura used to yield more agricultural products. So it was like a inseparable kind of identity between two parts of Tripura. So what was the actual scenario? So the actual scenario was that in 1818 only, we saw that the 45 of the state's total population were actually the non-tribals. And a resolution signed by the B.K. Bormon, the private secretary of the Maharajas, in September 13, 1919, which categorically mentioned that we should by all means encourage immigration and discourage emigration. Systematic efforts may be made to establish colonies of cultivators in the interior. So we can see that the culture of inviting the Bengalis, as the state started getting benefited out of them, so it was into the culture of Tripura. Okay. So if we look at the pre-1947 period, just before partition, the Bengalis, actually the migrants, they started pouring in Tripura from 1941 and during the riot days of 1946. But most of them were actually the Jiratia Projas of the Chakra Roshanapad estate. So it was more like an internal migration from plain Tripura to Tripura state. So like the way we always try to theorize that who are these refugees, where and how the state treated them. So in case of Tripura, it was not actually easy to term them the same as economic migrants or refugees, the way we actually got accustomed to treat the refugees. Huh? But after partition, what was the scenario? It is so interesting and kind of strange that when in West Bengal, there was a movement between the government and the refugees about their relief and rehabilitation policies in 1950. We noticed that the government of Tripura asked for help from the center in 1950. Okay, so before that they thought that okay, they are our own people, so they are like the state guests, so we should not ask for help from the central government even. And these refugees, they were rehabilitated in the hilly areas, suburbs, and tea gardens. And the Mufosil towns were mostly used to set up camps and colonies, as Agartala was already kind of congested. And the refugees were given professional and permanent rehabilitation too. And there was a huge budget allocation in the state level. I will just speak on Assam a little bit, so we will be able to like differentiate the scenario. Huh? And the nature of the job market has changed, natural, obviously. Huh? So if we look at the Assam, the other land, when I'm discussing about Northeast India, so what was the scenario there? as we all know that Assam was a natural refuge for migrants, that it shared its land, sheltered people, and the assimilation of different cultures. But the nature of migration in Assam and Tripura was always very different, as with Assam, Bengal was always connected through river routes and trade routes, and the idea and formation of a composite culture, a mixed culture, mixed population was actually into the culture of Assam. So it was reinforced actually by the migration of the different ethnic groups over a time, just as tradition again. So the case study of Northeast India was actually very different from the other parts of India. Okay. So the British annexation, which happened in 1826, it actually gave Assam a very strong regional identity, and it included both the Brahmaputra Valley and Barak Valley. And like Surma Valley always has a unique connection between East Bengal and Assam. And Kushiara River was like a trade route at that point of time. So a trail of labor migration, especially the tea laborers, as we know that Sylhet and Assam was connected through tea as a cash crop during the British period. But the Assamese, they were actually afraid of the settled agricultural laborers. They were fine with the seasonal laborers. But the British Assam became the eastern borderland of the British Empire. So during the colonial period, actually the nature of Assam has changed a little bit. From 19th century, these migrants, these Bengalis, they had taken advantage of the available lands, as there is a popular way of describing Assam. You can actually get it in even in books, that they say that Assam is a land of lahe lahe. Lahe means slow. Okay, so they were not that productive, they were not so energetic. So they also tried to depend on the East Bengali Muslim presence. And it was an official colonial policy, which is important. Okay, so it was a kind of official colonial policy. And before the first half of the 20th century, it is very strange that there was really hardly any official mention of the immigrants as a major social group. So what we can see that a huge number of migration was there, but no one was actually talking about them. No one was talking about that floating community. But there is a redrawing of boundaries in 1906 to 1912 during the Swadeshi period, as we know. And at that point of time, they actually made a province called Eastern Bengal and Assam. So at that point of time, this kind of migration or this kind of mobility became a legal kind of entity in Assam, between Assam and East Bengal, and Sylhet was actually the point. So the British government introduced line system in 1922. What was the line system? They actually separated some lands, and they realized that they should not disturb the ethnic people, the tribal people, the indigenous people, and they actually put a line in between villages, and they made it a law that the Bengali migrants or the Bengali immigrants or the laborers, they will not be able to cross these lines, and they actually made it a excluded area or partial excluded area. So it was actually the same in case of Chittagong Hill Tract. So the British government, they were intelligent enough to treat the migrant communities, and their chief intention was to yield more revenue. So they were very clear about all these things. And after the line system, the migration situation became so different. Maulana Bhasani, he's a very famous peasant leader from East Bengal. He actually tried to introduce an idea of unified Bongasam, Bengal and Assam, as a solution for land scarcity in East Bengal. But what was the actual fact? The actual fact was, I have quoted this from a government document. So actual fact was, the immigrants used to grow as many as 5 crops from the same soil, and in the same year, while the indigenous cultivators, they mentioned Assamese cultivators, could only think of 2 crops therefrom. So you can imagine, since the British people, they were actually the colonial Raj, the colonial government, so their chief intention was to yield more revenue and to get benefited out of the production. So they didn't care about the people sentiment, and both actually indigenous and migrants. Just before partition, Assam actually became a hotbed of politics around the migrants, refugees, especially Bengalis. Okay. So after partition, post partition, what was the actual scenario? Just like Tripura, it is a kind of same kind of a situation. The refugees were not a special category even there, especially in case of the Siletis, who were the residents of Sylhet, and after partition we know that by that referendum some portions that went back to East Bengal. At that point of time it was East Pakistan from 1956 after the introduction of the constitution of Pakistan. So a portion went back to East Bengal, and three actually thanas, it was there with the Surma Valley. So what was the actual scenario? The government actually, the government of Assam, they are so scared with the upcoming, obviously, Hindu refugees, and unfortunately, after partition, most of the Muslim domiciles of Sylhet, they first went back to East Bengal, and after the government have introduced the Delhi Pact of 1950, they decided to come back to Assam. So after partition and after the division of Sylhet, so Sylhet actually got divided. So it was not a right solution for the Assamese people as well to get rid of the Bengali population. And the government Assam was so scared that they announced rules and criterion for getting a domicile certificate right from 1948. As we know that our partition happened in 1947. So 1948, they were so scared to see the flood and different waves of refugees. They actually put some criteria to get a domicile certificates, and they prepared new definitions for indigenous and domicile categories to identify the non-Assamese people. It's very important, and the situation was so tricky, the situation was so volatile that Sardar Patel, I have intentionally quoted him here, Sardar Patel said, everywhere, wherever we have to deal with the refugee problem, we had to give priorities even against the local sentiment. So Sardar Patel and Nehru, they also could figure out that the situation in Assam, in case of Tripura, it was different, as the Pakistanis, they tried to they tried to grab some portions, and they actually designed a conspiracy in 1948, probably, if I'm not forgetting the date. So actually, since the northeastern border was porous, so the Pakistani authorities, they were more keen or more concerned to grab portions from these two states, from Assam and from Tripura. But that is another kind of politics. So today, this is a kind of background for my talk. Yeah, it's 12:31. Okay. So let me come to my topic for today. As the Dean sir was mentioning the star movement. So it is very important for us, for the historians, for the political scientists, and for the social scientists, that how to actually categorize these terms and what kind of meaning might be there behind a single term. So intentionally, I put all these meanings here, that we often use the word movement, like refugee movement, movement of the refugees. This expression, refugee movement, we always try to connect it with kind of with a kind of political movements, and for the movements of the refugees, we always try to show that it was kind of a relocation or repositioning. So as a student of history, we need to understand, or as a student of social science, as a researcher of social science, we need to understand that how to categorize these terms to conduct some more research on especially on the marginal communities, which is my favorite again. I love to work on marginal communities. So for the researchers, actually, I put this slide again, that when I am talking about the women, you can see that the top one is women. I actually tried to put that to me for this lecture, for this particular lecture, who are actually my target groups. Huh? So I just cannot say, or I just cannot categorize as that women. Huh? So within that domain of women, so I found all these categories like the marginal classes, minorities, non-citizens. Citizens means who migrated, who have some kind of documents but not the citizenship card. We know that it's very common in Tripura. Since I grew up in Kailasar, so I know all these things, that how important it is. And the tribal women, that is another category, the Dalits, the refugees, the stateless persons who have migrated in this land and who doesn't have any citizenship from the land they migrated, and also they don't have any citizenship or any kind of legal rights here. And the last category is very important. You probably will be surprised to see that I wrote down criminals. So who are these criminals? So actually all the political parties in all borderland areas, they always try to utilize these stateless people or the non-citizens to do unlawful things. And when something happens, they are the one actually, and the government, they try to they actually categorize them as criminals. So for my kind of marginal communities and women, and also women are there actually who got used by their family members, even their husbands. So these are like the insights what I got when I worked on borderlands. So this is the photo actually from a Sharanarthi camp of 1971 in Tripura. So the challenge is that it's so difficult to get a right picture on the refugees. So it's more difficult to get a proper picture or the real picture of the women refugees, as they are always a kind of a passive recipients of the policies of the treatments by the government and also by their family members. So I put this question, that how to recover their unheard voices and untold stories in after the 75th years of partition. As we all know that we are due to celebrate the 75th years of partition in this August, and government is celebrating that Amrita Mahotsav. So as a researcher, I thought that how to really recover their unheard voices and untold stories, as most of the refugees and refugee women, they are no more. They were old and they suffered so much, and due to malnutrition, their migration like struggles and everything. So most of the probably most of the refugees, so-called refugees, they are not even alive, and it's a second generation kind of statement. So for the researchers and especially for the students, and for the young faculty members, so I actually put this slide, that when I asked myself that how to approach archiving and documentation, if someone is interested to like voice their voices, so what can be the solution? So I realized that we may look at the historiographical trends, and we may look at the problems of methodology, and we can ask ourselves, like the way I asked myself, that how to address such problems and how to search for a solution. And probably the solution right now is oral history. And if me or you are sure that you want to do some oral narrative, then what is the prime reason for introducing oral sources as stopgap arrangements? Huh? So, and how it works? What are the problems of including oral sources? So these are the problems actually I thought that maybe a researcher or a student of social science, he or she may face. So I try to put down the problems to locate our thought process, my thought process, and probably our thought process. And what I realized is that the different methodologies actually might be important for the different disciplines. And for that, since it's the 75th years, So these two processes are probably very important in conceiving that how to actually plan to get the oral narratives. Number one, that archiving the tone, that in which tone these women are actually talking, and reading the silence. The second part is, to me, it's more important as I actually interacted with many women who decided not to speak. They said that I have nothing to say, so I will just not talk to her. So I think we may figure out a way to write that how to read the silence. So it is actually, we should write a history of silence again. That is my realization as a researcher. And what are the available so-called authentic sources to know about these women? So there are archival documents, government publications and reports. I actually used all these documents, so I tried to put down here census reports and gazetteers and statistical account, institutional paper, private papers, legislative assembly debates. But the problem is, you will hardly get women voice here. In legislative assembly, like the time period in which I generally work, it's from 1947 to 1977 or 81. So the women representation was so low in all these public sectors, so it's very difficult to get something actually about this. So I think it's better to concentrate on the memoirs, literary works, as in these kind of sources, you will get to see some kind of categorization and representation of events, facts and feelings, and officials, educated upper class, middle class, and the memoir of the lower classes and caste. You will get all these things in, especially in vernacular languages. In case of Tripura and Assam, you will get lots of stuff in Bangla. I actually got lots of stuff in Bangla. So if you read in between, you will be able to understand about their world, about their mental world, about their Andor Mohol and Antor Mohol. Antor Mohol means their inner world, okay. And through literary sources, it's very important to ask oneself that was there any initiative to touch the essences of history in this writing, and how the women issues got addressed in the literary work, even when the men, the counterpart, they are actually writing anything, any literary works or any memoir. So it's very important that how the women issues got addressed in their writing, and what was the nature of representation of women in contemporary literature. So these are actually the very important approach, I believe, to understand or to know the women voice. And since I work on partition and refugee issues, so I actually tried to figure out that what is the methodological problem and possibilities. So I wrote it down that one may feel that it is a right way to understand violence, as whenever we actually try to figure out that what happened during the partition and the role of women or the position of women, you will get lots of documents on abduction, on violence, on the way the political parties or the communities, Muslims and Hindus, they actually treated women from their communities and from the other communities, and the way Urvashi Bhutalia tried to or Ritu Menon, Kamala Basin, they also wrote about it. So I think a macro level research and a South Asian perspective. South Asian perspective means including narratives from Bangladesh and some kind of area studies. So probably these are the methods. And obviously, though I'm a historian by training, I believe that I should follow anthropological and sociological approach, as it's impossible to understand the world of the women without these kind of approaches. Like, as historians, we always follow a very different kind of approach. So I realized that if I try to write down about women and about like such things that which did not like touched by other historians or social scientists, and number one, they are marginal, number two, the area is marginal, number three, their history like includes a kind of marginalization. So I realized that probably it's a most difficult task to write down about them, and especially about their mental world, about their own world. So I realized that to write down all these things, these are actually probably the right pattern. My point was that probably a new psychological dimension in gender studies, but by unveiling the voice of the margins to understand the issue of trauma and narrating their experience. So it's important. And another actually another way to construct narratives is probably the highlighting only on the women issue based on oral sources. But again, it's very difficult to get their interviews, like the real marginal women, not the elite educated women. And the layered nature of the narratives across borders, community-based studies and fragmented societies of regional patterns of women's experience and the group of women, they started sharing collective retelling of the tragedy. So the benefit is that no one will get marked as, okay, she is a rape victim kind of thing, as we know that how our society, they actually the rape victims. So it may be a nice way to collect their voices. So what I realize, it is important that how the representation of women as a site of memory and site of violence. I try to jot down my findings. Okay. In films and literature, we always see that the bloodshed, sweat of terror, feeling of loss, and the tears of helplessness. In primary sources, what I mentioned earlier too, it's an incomplete and unreliable data of abduction, womanhood, and thousands of widowhood of thousands of women. In legislative assembly debates, police records, newspaper reports, you will get that recovery operation or the forcible recovery of the state or by community. And in the memory studies, it's absolute silent or reconstructing biographies. So these are the trends which are available right now. So I actually conducted probably 68 interviews of women respondents. So I tried to jot down my findings. Okay. So the educated and the elite women, what they said, that patriarchal assumptions created problems for women's identity and citizenship. The educated middle class women in this region only, in Northeast, like this photo is from Shillong. I interviewed her. She is a wife of a officer, Bengali officer. So that's why I put she talked to me so spontaneously and naturally, and she didn't try to hide anything. So I put her photo here. So the educated middle class women like her, like they actually, the women had to bear the main burden of displacement. The lower middle class women, they actually tremendous psychological pressure they faced, and the downtrodden classes about whom I am interested actually, they had to negotiate with the changed environment and the state policies. And it's so important that after partition the state policy was changing, so it was never static. Like in 1950 the state policy was different and the central government instructed something and the state government, they decided to implement something else. And like there was a huge difference between the policy of the central government and the implementation of the state government. And other than that, there are policies of the state government and the officials. It depended on the officials who tried to implement them in most of the cases. So the refugees were in soup actually. So they were never sure that what they will get, how they will get. So it was a huge crisis for them. So it is my question to myself that after all these documents, that why these women refugees, they are invisible. So what I saw, that they always remained others as others in the eyes of the administration, and there is a relationship of the dominance and dominated in each and every layer, really, in household, for household staff, in the outer world, everywhere. So their characteristic feature and the way of expressing themselves became their essential identities. Most of the women, they actually like communicated this to me, that they were so scared in expressing themselves, especially in the Mufusils and bordering towns. And the being the member of the majority group, they are still minorities with all categorization. As we know that the refugees, they migrated The Hindus, they migrated to India, and the Muslims, they migrated to East Bengal, East Pakistan, with the idea that they will be a part of the majority group from a part of the minority group. But after migration, they realized that, okay, by religion, they became a part of the majority group, but with all categorization and all exclusion from the mainstream, they felt that they became, they remained minorities and others in the eyes of the administration and the normal people. So they were almost the first group of the lower middle class women who came out in public domain, which is actually a very positive, encouraging kind of thing. But still, the issues of discrimination and marginalization was there, even in case of these lower middle class women. And the positive thing was, the most challenging part was the recreation of their identity, house architecture, and women in the outer world. House architecture is very important. When I conducted interviews, many women, they told me that, we had an am gach in our body in Borishal, so I put this am gach here. So these things are actually very important to creation of their identities. And these refugee women, actually, they contributed in the recreation of the identity of the family, not only for themselves, for the family even. So from the theoretical, we can say that the women had a dual role in at home as well as in the outside. I put this photo intentionally, that you can see that refugee women, she is carrying some, like, she went to bazaar, and she was carrying something, and this girl is there, that is so teeny, who is also a child, but she is carrying another child. So you can understand from the meaning from this photo. Actually, women had a dual role at home as well as in the outside from a very early age. In case of methodology, probably to work on these issues and work on the women issues, gender issues, the qualitative and interpretive approach, comparative parameters, probably is are the right way, and the subjective understanding of human expressions. It's so important. It's so important. So I actually talked about some methodologies, and diverse type of other sources are important, like unstructured interviews, relevant memoirs, literature, narratives, and other forms of oral history. And we may use some kind of quantitative tools as well, in forms of graphs or tables. So for documentation was what I was just telling you, that for documentation, the important part was to fix a target group, like the way I fixed my target group: linguistic identity, class, caste, profession, and unstructured interview. Expression of women who to field investigation is very important. Similarity in types of information collected mostly from the secondary sources, and making hypotheses to secondary research and validated by the field visit. That is my idea of conducting research. So two ways are very important. It is I am saying this for my students, for the research scholars. So to me, if you ask me that what do you think a new kind of methodology, what I try to do is I consult archives and I try to build my own archives. So if we don't try to, as social scientists, if we don't try to make our own archives, so after maybe 50 years, the researchers and the fellow, like, writers or the academicians, they will not get enough sources. So as a researcher, I always feel that it's our responsibility to make our research in two ways. Number one, obviously extracting the facts from the archives, and also like what you are gathering, what you are, like, when you are writing a transcription, you should put maybe digitally or maybe hard copies in such a way so that when you will feel like that, okay, you are done with that, you can't work anymore, or you are too old, you can actually give your collection to someone else to build another kind of archive. So it is not only your publication, your books, your articles, your name and fame. As a social scientist, it's our responsibility to build archives to help or promote research to the next generation. So that's what I believe. I always try to do that. Okay. So at the last, it's my last slide. I try to theorize my arguments. What I actually, what I said for 50 minutes. So I actually I find these concepts very, very important. It's Bakhtin's concept of polyphony. Bakhtin actually gave us a wonderful example that how a dialogic nature of the marginal writings, and when they are entering into conversations, when they write or either intentionally or not, and how actually we can use their letters, their petitions, their dialogue, their conversations when they are fighting with the officials, which we often get in archives, that in note sheets, that you will get many note sheets that some are refugees appealing, and our officer is writing something else, and again he or the other person, he or she is giving a note. So for the researchers, all these like archivists, librarians and researchers, this fresh dialogue is so important. So I think that these letters or the petitions or the local sources or the indigenous sources, we actually can use it, and we can try to understand that what is their polyphonic voice, as it's very difficult to get their individual voice. So probably it's the right way to try to understand that what is actually the essence of their voices, and what when they wrote, say though they wrote also they also entered into a conversation with themselves through their letters or petitions or writings. And if we try to contextualize them, like try to put those voices in social context, in economic context or political context, probably we may get to write something very new or something very unique even after 75th years of partition and about these marginal women. Thank you. I hope I could make sense.
Yeah, that is. Thank you, Mrs. Ghoshal. You have made a nice presentation over here, focusing on marginalization of women within and outside, not only because they have become refugees, but also in their house, in their family, in their society also, because the torture they have undergone from the male sections, they have been marginalized. They are marginalized both at home as well as outside. But the irony is, as you have pointed out rightly, they have to become the homemakers, but at the cost of their social prestige. Okay, thank you very much for that point. So now the session is open for interaction discussion with others.
Hello, Anindita. This is Sharmila. If you remember, we had met in IIT Guwahati, yeah, in a seminar. Hello.
Yeah,
It's so wonderful.
definitely.
Yeah, it's so wonderful, to see your book, the book which probably any social scientist in Tripura would like to read and use for research, and that was a wait for quite some time. It's like I thought when I came to Tripura and I was so keen to know the sociology or the history of the, I mean, I will not put it in this thing, a refugee or whatever. Let's use migrant. That should be used in sociology largely, migrant, because it has a categories, has meaning to different categories again. So so it is very wonderful, to know about your work and the deep research, the the, what do you call, the the description, the thick description of the history of the Tripura and the Bengalis in Tripura. It was wonderful, and the photographs were absolutely amazing that you have collected from India office or somewhere. Excellent to know and see them, and very importantly, the women. The women issue is always an important issue in when it comes to migration or immigration. And I'm not here to just appreciate you. We will probably be in touch again, once again. Uh, one thing that I'm just wondering, that how did you really do this sample sizing, like you had 165 women that you have, you have collected from different methods, you have used different sources, but how did you really divide the upper class woman, upper caste woman, lower class, or you have also made a category called downtrodden? I don't know who are you really putting them, whether low caste or low class. So that was a confusion. And also you said, in one of these, what you call your findings from the educated upper class woman, the patriarchal assumptions that created problems of women's identity and citizenship. I think, I know that you have lot of data, lot of findings to say. I think your upcoming book is going to say more about it. I'm waiting for it. And yeah, maybe you can just explain it, how this, what is this patriarchal assumption that really had a major dominance in for the migrant woman, yeah, for the refugee women at that moment. And very, I mean, I congratulate you for the idea of having, your own archive, for making it used for the new scholars, because it is a problem in Tripura. We've been discussing how to get, hold of archival records. And you have worked in Tripura, you have worked in Bangladesh, you have worked in India office, etc. So you know now the source, and you are opening up. I'm going to send all my students to your archive soon. So that's it. And if you can, explain just one or two things, yeah.
Yeah, Sharmila, it's so nice to meet you and see you. I wrote it in the Facebook post, that I'm so excited that I'm going to meet some of my friends and colleagues virtually though. So I'm so happy to meet you, first.
Yeah.
Hello. So thanks for these questions, and thanks for these wonderful questions. It is actually, I think the research scholars, they will also get benefited by your question and obviously by my answers. But through your questions, even as a researcher, what I learned in these last 20 years is actually from my master's days. I was very fortunate to study in Jadavpur University, and I always tell people that the Jadavpur University, they actually, my professors, probably the most important thing, what they contributed, they actually...
I'm allowed to get in, please, Dr. Anindita. I think all the questions should come and then answers, please. Because if we allow one question and answer, then I think things will go out of step. Many people waiting to ask questions, right?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm watching Vidisha. Vidisha, please come in.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Vidisha, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'll right away, quickly talk about what you have. I mean, it's a very lucid and a very extensive as well as intensive presentation. By extensive and intensive, I mean that it's broad. It begins from the idea of the state formation of Tripura, then it goes on to, compare the status, the historical statuses, the differentiations and the similarities of Assam, Tripura as well as Bengal. And then after that, it comes to the modern, the problems which arose out of partition. I mean, partition was such a catastrophic event that it disturbed the entire eastern side of this peninsula as well as the west. But we already know from prior research that has already been done that the kind of partition, the nature of partition between the west and the east were quite different. In many characteristics. Because, say, for instance, in the east, as we can all see, I mean, being stationed in one of the northeastern states, we have seen that the kind of negotiations and the kind of discourses about partition and the refugee problem is still going on, perhaps in very big sense. It's a very, very live sort of a presentation. It's a very live sort of a history that we were listening to as Anindita Ji was going on. I could actually feel it. These are some of the things. Then what actually, I quickly, I don't know how much time I have, but without going into the details, a few things really hit me. One was, as I have already talked about, the relevance of this work, which I think is very, very important, because not only from the perspective of the politics, but also some perspectives of what we are now coming to know as the Anthropocene. That is, social scientists all over the world, as well as scientists, are sort of debating that we are going to see more and more refugee problems. We are going to see more and more movements, as Anindita Ji has already mentioned, because of a impending environmental disaster that is all of us. That is possibly going to hit all of us. Okay, so in terms of that, I think the relevance of this work is very important. Plus, not only from the east, but I think this land has also seen refugees from the western side of the northeastern border, that is Myanmar, Burma. The whole idea of the Rohingya refugees coming and settling down. I mean, it's a very live debate. We come across these things every day in paper. So as far as the relevance of this work is concerned, I think it's a very live. The next, a few more things quickly. How much time do I have? Because I need to discuss two or three things. Paramita Ji, how much time do I have?
I have two more
Hello?
persons asking questions, raising hand. So it depends on our guest.
So 5 more minutes?
She can spare for us, because there are many questions coming up. People are raising hands. I see Anjana Bhattacharya and
Okay. So 5 minutes?
Yeah, you can take maybe.
Ma'am, I can't hear you. Ma'am, I couldn't hear you.
Okay.
You don't hear me? My mic is on.
I'm not in a hurry. I can stay here up till 1:15 or 20, maybe 1:30. Fine.
Fine.
Oh,
And
I'll just wrap up.
you finish off. After that, Anjana and Ashutosh Tiwari.
Okay, so I'll just take 5 more minutes. Okay, so now coming to the methodological part, I think two things here are again very striking. One is the part of the silence, and the other is invisibility. There are not many other things also, but I'm not getting into it because of the shortage of time. Now, these two tropes, I think, are very important if we are going to read not only about gender, but if we are going to read something about labor, because that's my field, and I have constantly struggled with this silence and invisibility. You see invisible. There is a process of invisibilizing, if I may call. I don't know if there's. I know that there is no word in English called invisibilizing, but there is a process which tries to make marginal sections of the population invisible in the official documents. And I think that Anindita Ji has touched very, very deeply. And of course, this kind of invisibilization of the process which tries to make people invisible, also leads to a lot of silence. So I really appreciate the idea that Anindita Ji was talking about, the writing a history of silence. And if you are going to if you are going to deal with a history of gender, and we are going to study about women, women or anybody, for instance, I deal with artisans, okay? So artisans, there's absolute silence about artisans. It's really like pulling them out of the historical text. But I don't know. I think most of the audience today is from the sociology department. So I think sociology and anthropology really give a lot of support to this kind of work, because as I think in one of the slides that Anindita ji has talked about, she's talked about this whole idea of unstructured interviews. I have myself gained a lot from unstructured interviews, because again this questionnaire thing, I don't know how much, I don't know, Anindita ji might be able to further throw light on this, but this structured thing, because sometimes the structures that's there in our minds and the structures that are there in their minds, the people whom we are talking to are completely different, and that is when these structures fall flat. So I think these unstructured interviews are very, very important. So students who would be working in this field, I think will have to take care of these things. Then lastly, I think I am overall, if I'll quickly again sum up, the becoming of a refugee, what it entails to be a refugee. It's not at all something which it's something which is I think which deeply affects the psyche of a human being. For instance, I cannot imagine today, if somebody asks me, I've been a migrant person, I've never worked in the place where I have grown up, but today say if somebody brands me as a refugee, that kind of feeling, which is also why this kind of work is very important, because we must understand what goes in the making, the becoming of a refugee. And I think Anindita's new book, which is, I think, edited volume, which has come out yesterday. I congratulate her. I hope that soon we will have the chance to congratulate you physically. But so these are things which make this work very relevant, and to the students and to the audience who are listening, I think these are some of the points that really struck me during this presentation. So I thank you very much. Thank you, Washing. Thank you, Paramita ji, for giving me a chance to speak on this forum. Thank you so much.
Now is Anjana there? I think Anjana is
Yeah,
long
Pankaj,
and
I'm
left.
there.
And
Actually, uh, I'll take just 2 minutes. It was wonderful that
Anjana,
Madam Anindita has, portrayed in front of all of us regarding the women-related issues. I'm sorry that I have been joined little bit late, so I could not go through what you have, already talked earlier. So I am basically, Anindita ji, I'm basically from psychology department, and the way you have uttered that, the trauma and the pain and suffering of women particularly. So I have been working in the field of women, particularly for violence victims, women violence victims, since for the last 5-6 years. And when we talk about narratives, very rightly you have pointed out, very nicely you have pointed out that narratives are very much important when we talk about quality research, particularly qualitative research. So what I felt in field, I just would like to share with you that often women hesitate to, even if you go for oral narratives also, they hesitate to speak out about their problems, they hesitate to speak out what are the problems they are facing or they have faced, and how they are actually coping up with those, problematic situations. So I faced a little bit of problems when we were trying to do some interviews with the violence victim women. So I just would like to know from you that is there anything which you also face while going through the interview through the unstructured questionnaire, or when you were interviewing some women? Did you face this type of problems? And if you face, how you have overcome those things, so that I can learn from you and I can use this in our research area also.
Is there any other question?
Yes, I think Ashutosh Tewari is there.
Yes, ma'am. Good
So
afternoon,
ask
ma'am.
your question.
Yeah. myself Asutosh Tiwari from Political Science Department. Madam, uh, very nicely, historically, you have highlighted that who were the original inhabitant of Tripura. And my query is, Madam, what would you call the people who migrated to the northeastern region of India from East Pakistan during 1970s because of the separation of West Pakistan that time? And secondly, what is your opinion about the people with no land? Uh, in my opinion, to whom you refer as marginalized community. This is my query, madam. Thank you.
Can you please tell me your first question? Some students were there, so I couldn't hear properly.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
madam, what would we call the people who migrated to the northeastern region of India during 1970s because of the separation of West Pakistan? Because in one of your slide I saw you wrote that
What he means is
you
during
you
the
you
liberation
wrote
of
that
Bangladesh,
yeah you wrote that in one
71.
of your slide one of your slide I saw that you wrote that they are not refugee, they are immigrants, right? So what we call them? And secondly, madam, what is your opinion about the people with no land, to whom I think you considered as a marginalized community? Thank you, ma'am.
I see Barnali Das raising hand. Will you ask your question, please? Be brief and to the point.
Uh,
Barnali Das.
yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am. Here, Dr. Barnali Das. So, I am not, it's not a question, but it's a comment. I have worked with tea garden workers, and Brother Sharmila ma'am rightly said while I was working on my PhD thesis. So, it is very difficult to get data about Tripura or something about Tripura. So, like the tea garden, ma'am, you have said this that the people who has migrated from east, like a plain Tripura to hill Tripura, that time, then I want to I want to comment on that even the tea garden was established by kings of Tripura, and they invited Bengali entrepreneurs from that time East Pakistan, or not, that was not East Pakistan, that was that plain Tripura from Kumila region to set up tea estates in Tripura. And that after that the migration, that workers who migrated, who was working people, tea garden worker, who are working in tea garden tea estates, they were migrated from other parts of India as well as Assam, that Chargula exodus, during Chargula exodus. And while I was working with them during my field work, I came to know that when I was taking narratives and oral histories from my respondents, so I came to know that some of them even migrated from the east, that time, like East Pakistan, that after partition, that East Pakistan, that time, that Bengal was like East Pakistan, they migrated to. Have you just, I just wanted to know, have you, while you were working as with the migration and marginalized, because tea garden workers, women, they are socially that they are, as a woman they are marginalized, and as a class they are marginalized, and they been migrated from those. Have you worked with them, or have you thought about incorporating something about them in your this thing,
Can I please
in your work?
respond to these questions and then take three questions again? Otherwise, I'll forget.
Yes, yes, you do.
Yeah,
Please, please.
I already forget the question of Anjana madam. Acha, let me start with Bornali.
To remind,
Okay,
Anjan
yes,
asked
ma'am.
about the methodologies for narratives, taking narratives.
Acha, okay. Let me start with Bornali. Bornali, I never worked with tea garden laborers, and the refugees, the group with whom I have actually worked, So they are very different from the tea garden laborers. As tea garden laborers, as Shumita Sen has rightly pointed out, that they are actually kind of economic migrants, and the group with whom I interact, they are kind of forced migrants. So the categorization
Okay.
is so different, na? And
Yes, yes, ma'am.
it's like a huge literature, you know. It is like a huge canvas on which both you and me we can work. Okay. So it's actually very difficult to like tell you that what kind of versions you may collect or I may collect, but I can tell you that what probably Anjana madam was also asking me, that how I actually gather all these voices. I could conduct all these voices, and I really want to share that with you. Like when I go for a field trip, I always wear very normal dresses. Okay, since I don't look like them now, I look very, unfortunately, I look very urban, a kind of elite. So to conduct a proper interview or to collect oral narrative, it's very important for a researcher to identify her with them, with the respondent. It's very important. Otherwise, they will not unburden their mind. Obviously, if they don't feel that you are exactly like them, they will not tell you their stories. Okay. So in my case, what I learned, no one actually taught me all these things. I learned all these things from my experience. What I do now, always when I go to someone's place, first I ask them to like give me something so that I can sit in the floor. In most of the cases, they give me a madur. What you say in Tripura? I forgot the term. Sorry. Madur only. Okay, so they give me a madur. So I always try to sit with them. And in most of the cases, when I work, I try to work with the women respondents. The problem is the male counterparts. They don't allow women to talk to me, talk to
Yeah,
probably the research.
Yes, that's
That's
the
a
thing.
huge
That's,
problem.
yeah, that is
So
true.
what
Even
actually
I encountered that problem, so I had to overcome that problem while I
Yeah,
was
what
doing
technique I
interview.
generally follow is that I ask for a cup of tea. Okay, and I am that, can you please give me some kind of muri? So I am very hungry. So I actually learned over the years, if you are asking for tea, or if you are asking for muri, or if you are sitting in madur in the floor, so they feel like, acha, maybe you are also kind of like them. So I discuss problems with my parents, especially with my husband. So they feel, acha, okay, she also has similar kind of problems. And the last thing what I do, if I can't like manage to talk to them even after all these efforts, what I try to do, I tell them that I need to go to the washroom. As I know, since I'm a woman, so I know that no men will be accompanying me. So it's like a typical Bengali culture, and since I work with women who stays in Mufossil areas in most of them, and the families are kind of conservative. So intentionally, like I try to talk to them, converse with them. Like I ask for a mug, I ask for some more water to linger on the talk, and I always felt that when every time when I try to do all these things, so I try to enter to their kitchen, their Ranna ghar, that is actually their world, what I realized. Or when they are accompanying me to the toilet. So I try to talk about their problems, their issues. So I realized that after that, they start feeling comfortable with me. And that is probably the best way to conduct interviews, unstructured interviews. If you don't like switch on your recorder or a video or something like that, as I realized that like if you try to do all these things, they become very careful and cautious that what exactly you are recording. So it's the best way to talk to them, keep unstructured interviews, and I always write that when I am back in the car. So I always write down all those points. So that's a very challenging task. You can't take your phone, you can't chat with anyone, so you will forget. But I actually follow this kind of method to get seasoned with that family, and I always eat something from there. So I realized as a researcher that is very important method. That if you eat with them, na, so they will feel like you are their guest and you are apon. What they say, na, they apni ki apon. So it's very important, huh? So that is.
Thank you, Dr. Anindita. Nice tips for ice breaking.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually, madam, I try all these things. So I always realize that
Methods of ice breaking.
toilet thing is very important. Really, if
Yes.
someone is not talking at all, so that is like the last trick. Huh?
True.
I felt like sharing that with
To
you.
strike a chord.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks to
Then-
Bhagwat Janata Jamatia. These will be the last two questions that we will be taking.
No, let me answer to Shormila. No?
Sure, sure.
Shormila asked me a very theoretical question. Shormila, thanks for asking this question. But like the way you wanted to know that how I categorize this class and caste, I actually categorize these class and caste through their voice. I ask them that who are you? And I always realize that they always get very shocked about it, as probably no one asked them this question, that who are you? It's not your name. It's your education, it's your social background and how you see yourself. So it's actually over the time I realized that for all the marginal communities who are economically marginal, linguistically marginal, I met many people, not women, many people actually, both men and women, who is an IAS officer or who is actually elite in every possible way, but he or she is marginal. So like to everyone I ask this question and I try to talk in their language. Like when I am Tripura, I talk in Sylheti. When I am Assam, I speak a little bit of Futa kind of Assamese. When I'm in Bangladesh, I speak their language. So I think that categorization is more important when someone is categorizing himself or herself and talking about his or her own caste identity, class identity. So I put all these categorization based on their categorization, not based on my categorization. And to me, I think it's a very important aspect of my own research, as I try to keep a ethical kind of standard. It's very important. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, my friend Anam Zakaria, she is very famous. She's from Pakistan. She shared a story with me. I want to share that with you all. That she tried to interview someone who migrated from East Bengal, East Pakistan to West Pakistan after the Liberation War, and you know that he was about to die. She was about to die. Sorry. So she was some lieutenant colonel's wife. Okay, very elite. So she told me that after she conducted the interview and when she was going back, so she fainted. So actually from Anam, I learned this from this experience that as a researcher, you have to push your respondents. Otherwise, you cannot get materials. And you are investing so much time, energy, money. It happened with me that I didn't eat anything for 6-7 days when I'm doing my field work. I used to carry lots of money, but nothing is there, and they're so poor now. You can't even take out your water bottle, which is a Bisleri water, and or apple. I always carry some apple and cake, so they're so poor. I never had so much apple so that I can share that with them, and I couldn't take out that apple to eat. So all these things are so important to conduct a field work. So one has to be very, very passionate about research. Otherwise, it's very difficult to maintain so many things. It's so many things, really. You have to be super careful, and you need to behave as if you are very casual. You are their next door neighbor. So I think as a researcher, it's a very, very difficult task, and you have to be extremely passionate about research. Otherwise, you can't do all these things at a time. apart from your family issues and lots of rigorous things at the university or something like that. Okay. Am I forgetting anyone's question? Right. Ashutosh asked me an interesting question. Ashutosh, I want to tell you that the categorization of the refugees was never similar. What I actually mentioned, I didn't have so much time, and the focus is different here. Actually, in if you read the primary sources in late 1940s to 50s, so the Indian government, since they never signed the Protocol of 1951 or 1967, actually the international mandate. So first they tried to categorize these refugees as displaced persons, number one, then evacuees, and they actually avoided to use the term refugees. From 1960s, especially after the riot of 1964, they started categorizing these refugees as Pakistani minorities, fugitives, illegal migrants, illegal immigrants. Okay, and so after 1971, they started telling or stating all these refugees as Sharanarthis. As during 1971, the popular term was Sharanarthi. But it is so interesting to understand that in the partition proceedings, which is available in Tinmurti Bhavan, it's in open stock. Anyone can read it. So you will get to know this word refugee. So before the partition, the British government and all these Indian top political leaders, Jinnah, Nehru, and from Hindu Mahasabha, S.P. Mukherjee, they started using this term refugees. But just after partition, since the Indian government, they realized that they cannot maintain the international standard, they avoided to use this term refugee, as if they use this term refugee, I have actually written about it in my book. So then they will have to actually give some kind of relief, some kind of protection and care. So they try to avoid that, and that is the chief reason why actually they try hard not to use this term. And also for the Western part, the popular word to define a Hindu refugee, as we know, is Mohajir. In Bangladesh, in East Bengal, it was Mohajir in Bangla. And the other terms in Urdu newspaper, it is Pahangirs, and in East Bengal, they used to call them as Rifu or Refu, and lots of other terms are there. But the most important thing is that all these terms are actually derogatory. And in Kachar, in Surma Valley, there is a plant. There is a plant which grows very fast. Okay, they term that plant is refugee lota. So you can understand how, like, these refugees, they migrated from this land to that land. They thought they will be a part of the majority community from a minority community status. But after migrating, also they started. It's so humiliating that they termed that plant as refugee lota, and a refugee was telling me that he's not even aware about it. That it's so humiliating. Okay, so during fieldwork, you have to be super careful. So that is the point. You need to catch all these things. Like if I ignore this, now I write this even for that website of Penn University State. As it was so striking that they named the plant as a refugee lota, that they grow so fast, so they are so disturbing. So they are uprooted people. They are thinnomul. No one wants them. Okay. Tell me.
Thank you, madam.
Thanks for asking this question. I'm very passionate about this research actually. So when I talk about them, I talk too much.
That shows on you that how passionately you are involved in all this. One cannot but be passionate about this, being from this land. That's the last two piece of questions for you. If they're asking, Bhagushri and Janata Jamatia. If you are going fast, anything, please do keep that brief.
Hello, this is Bhagyashri here. Dr. Ghoshal, I have 3 questions for you. First of all, you have
the
sorry,
liberty to take
yeah,
answer
you
to
have
every one of them.
you have categorized your interviewees into 4 categories. So, on what basis and what kind of agency, and by agency I mean religious, caste, financial, or educational, have you made the division? My second question would
I have
be.
already answered this. This was Sharmila's question. So I have already answered this question. So it
Okay,
is their category. was not my categorization. They categorize themselves in that way. So I just put their voices and I made some groups. That's it. In a piece of pen, paper and pen. Simple.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. And my second question is, you stated that the middle class educated women bore the main burden of displacement. So, what do you mean by main burden? Because I have heard memories of experiences of double displacement, that is, to and fro to the Northeast India and East Bengal from my grandparents. So, according to them, being financially middle class actually worked in their favor, and they could avoid the atrocities because of their access to information beforehand, as compared to the financially underprivileged ones. So, could you please elaborate on the main burden thing? And my third question, it actually aligns with what Mr. Jamatia has been asking in the chat box. The non-royal indigenous people of Tripura have obviously undergone quite a violent acculturation. Could you please elaborate on the cultural ambiguity that was faced by the indigenous women because of that? Thank you very much.
I think Janata Jamatia also asking questions
Janata
on that
Jamatia?
light. So you can answer for both of them at a time. And if Janata, if you could please ask your question.
Yeah, yeah, ma'am. Thank you, and it's a very great that we are listening to such a wonderful lecture, ma'am. My simple question, ma'am. Ma'am, you have categorized the words like marginalization of women or like tribal women and the indigenous people. So, ma'am, during this pre and post-colonial period, or during the liberation war of independence of Bangladesh, there was ongoing refugees towards the borderland or towards many parts of India. So, how do you categorize these tribal women? Means, is it so that they are also called a tribal women in the Bangladesh or like in other parts of the neighboring borders of the world, or how do you categorize these tribal women and the indigenous people? And my second question is, what was the perception of host society on refugee issues? How the refugee, which is a term being used in your lecture, how it has impacted towards the indigenous or so-called the host society, their culture, their religious aspect, and their linguistic. So how it has impacted, man? Just a very simple two question. Thank you, man.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for these very, very interesting questions. Just so good that you listen to me so carefully. I'm actually grateful. Okay, ভাগ্য এটা নেবেন? আমি আর 5 মিনিটে শেষ করে দেব। আমি আসছি। ভাগ্যি, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I know about the double displacement. Not the you have but interviewed so many like respondents in Bangladesh and in West Bengal. Like probably you know about the 1950, the Delhi in which the both governments, India government and Pakistan government, they try to tell the refugees if they go to their own land, they will get social security. That's a very hypothetical kind of thing. But the key issue was that they will get assigned some kind of protection. Sorry.
For the participants and the questions remain unanswered, Ghoshal has again come in. Anindita, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I got disconnected. Can you?
Yeah, I understand. We can
Hello?
see you and hear you.
Okay, yeah. Let me finish. Sorry, I got disconnected because of connection. I'm in university, so it's kind of far away from the city. So it's okay. So what I was telling, that happened to too many people, not like in Northeast India, but everywhere, probably in the western part as well. So the most important thing is like who got doubly displaced, their crisis was worst as the nation state. First time when they got disconnected, first time they extended their to give them support and some kind of help. But when placed for the second time, the nation state refused to give them any kind of support. So that was the problematic part. But this categorization is so important as the middle class women. Like when I talk to them, almost everyone they told me that in the other side of the border, they used to belong to the like the elite class or the probably the on the top class of the society. So for them it was like a double kind of adjustment or double kind of like negotiating with the state system and the family system, as they were liable to feed their family, and they were the person who actually faced challenges to recreate their own identity. So in one way, the family members, the earning members, they had to go to a very traumatic kind of thing, as they say that they always had to do counseling to the male counterparts. We never actually think about all these things, that it is the women who stay at home. They actually, when they say that my father was very depressed, or my mother, my husband was very depressed, or my son was very depressed, so I had to do all the counseling. And when they said that you can't run the household with this much of money, I said no, I'll be able to manage. Okay. So it was actually, they tried to pretend to their family members that they are fine, but they struggled twice to give them a feeling that everything is going well. So these kind of layers are always there in women versions. You will never get to hear all these stories from a male counterpart, from their male counterpart. So it's so important. And yeah, Janta Jamatia, thanks for asking this question. I have actually written extensively on tribals. So please invite me for another day to talk about tribals. So it's impossible to talk about these things. So I actually worked on Chittagong Hill Track. I actually worked on the Chakmas who migrated in Arunachal Pradesh and to Tripura. From Tripura they migrated. And I worked extensively on tribals as a host community, as an indigenous community. I wrote in English and in Bangla, and I actually tried to write down their experiences. I conducted interviews, I went to their places, talked to them. So it's a very different kind of thing, but what I can say, like what I sincerely feel, is that for us 1947 and for Tripura 1949 is like very important, as we feel that at that point of time Tripura got some kind of freedom, but for the tribal communities, for the ethnic communities, I'm actually against these word tribal. You know, I also write this word tribal, but I feel better to call them as ethnic communities, as it's their land. So for them, actually there are so many respondents. They said that you know, it was a Shadhinota for you people, but it was Paradhinota for us. So when I try to see things from their perspective, from their focus, so I think it's a very reverse kind of story. It is my ambition to write a full book on the impact of partition on the tribals, and I'm actually trying to get funds. So I'll cover all these regions, Garo, Khashi Hills, the Tripura, Chittagong Hill Track, as I know a little bit. So now I can't say all these things as I know too much about it. Okay, so I need a separate lecture about it. And I'm very vocal about the tribal rights, especially tribals of Chittagong Hill Track who lives in Bangladesh. So their condition is terrible, really. So thank you so much. I'm running out of time. It's 1:40.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Anindita Ghoshan.
I congratulate you, Anindita. Anindita.
Congratulating you for your recent publication and the forthcoming one also on tribal.
We are waiting for that publication in your book.
No, but I need to get the fund, I need to work, and then only I write. But I think before I die, I will write that book on entirely on the tribals, like impact of partition on tribals, as no one worked on it. No one worked properly. So I really wish to work, and we really wish to write from their perspective.
I'm sure you will find fun. There will be no problem about that. And I sincerely thank you for this very lively discussion and a very incisive lecture that you have given. Thank you very much. With this, I thank all the participants, and I thank also Professor Shamul Das, our Dean, to have presented here today. And I thank all my audiences. I had some questions, but I think it has been a long day. Some other time. Looking forward to really engage with you in near future. Thank you, Anindita. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this session. I'm grateful to all of you. I talked so much.